Thank you, Professor, for doing this. This is really exciting. Well, for the starters, could you please introduce yourself and your work to us?
My name is Sanjay Kumar. I am a professor at Center for the Study of Developing Societies. This is a social science research institute based in Delhi. What we do, most of us do research on various themes. My own research is on electoral politics, looking at how identity plays into Indian politics. I have also been doing research on Indian youth and things related to other themes like say farming in India. How do farmers feel? Something on women voters also. So my larger work is on electoral politics, but I have been trying to look at electoral politics from the prism of different sections of voters. I did mention about women and youth, and these are two very large sections of Indian voters. So I've been looking at how they vote, what do they think about elections. This is the entire 25 years journey of my research based at CSC.
Thank you, Professor, for your introduction. I gather that you worked on that your research has covered a lot of themes, and what you're really interested to cover today is identities and how it plays within electoral processes. And since you've done a lot of work on it, I want to ask how and what exactly has been your journey toward these research topics, since you've been engaged and you've been involved into the particular field since a long time. So what exactly has been your journey? Could you share a little bit about that?
Uh, I started working on these themes way back in 1993. That was the time I had just completed my studies, and I was looking for some opportunity to get a first-hand feel about field work. This was the time I came across two of the colleagues who later on they turned into my colleagues, Professor Yogendra Yadav and Professor V.B. Singh. So they were working at CSDS. So I came and I met them. And this is 1993, the month of October, November. That was the time when 5 states were going to poll. And these states, if I remember correctly, were Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Mizoram, and Himachal Pradesh. So I initially started working with them, helping them in the project, trying to do a study in these 5 states. And that was the time I was trying to just work as a research assistant with them. But I started my journey from there. But soon after that, a couple of years later on, there was an election in Bihar. This is 1995. And this is the time I took up more responsibility of doing research. I was made in charge of coordinating the team of 20 researchers based in Bihar. So this is the time I started my real journey. I plunged into active research in politics. I went to many constituencies in Bihar to do field work. I coordinated the team. And from there onwards, I never looked back. After that, there was a Lok Sabha election, big Lok Sabha elections in 1996. Why I say big Lok Sabha elections? That was big for us because this is the first time we tried to set up a national team. We set up a national network of scholars across the country. And during the 1996 Lok Sabha elections, we did several rounds of study to understand voters' attitudes, perceptions, anxieties, their attitude towards vote, why they want to vote, why they want to vote out the government, or why they want to support a particular candidate. This is how it started my journey, and ever since then, we have been covering all the Lok Sabha elections. And during this journey, when I started looking at elections very closely, we also started realizing that if we want to understand elections, we have to go deep into different localities. We also need to look at different segments of voters. And that is how I plunged into looking at how the youth of this country will think, how women as a voter behave. So this is how I started looking at different sections of voters, tried to do big projects or continuous studies on different sections of voters.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely sounds really interesting. Like you mentioned, you started work in the 90s and you've covered a fair bit of research and identity. Specifically, I've read some papers on your work on gender and electoral politics, caste and class, specifically after post the Mandal period. So because you've covered these topics fairly, why do you think research on the topic of identity and electoral processes are important in India? And given that the research process is important, what do you think when you're researching these topics? What are the results that you come up with, which can manipulate the system for better? Are you there, Professor?
The identity is a question about his or her identity, and identities are of several kinds. Caste is an important question of identity. So when you meet people, when we try and introduce ourselves, we tell our name. We also tend to mention the state which we belong to. So over the years, I realized that identity is a very big question to the people living in this country. Yes, there are different shades of differences between how someone feels close to the identity, to his or her identity. And we have realized that if you belong to a state where the language is not the dominant language, and I should mention like states like say, West Bengal or Assam or Tamil Nadu or Kerala, where people speak not the language which is not the dominant language of spoken by the large number of people in this country. So the question of identity is much stronger among them. So we have realized that the question of identity cuts across people across caste, people across region, people across religion, but it is more pronounced among people who are in minorities. The minorities could be in terms of language, in terms of caste, in terms of religion. So when I realized that identity is such an important question, I also started looking at does it also matter in politics, and this is how we started doing research on elections, and I felt that identity is an important question even in Indian electoral politics. Look at how elections take place. Whenever elections are announced, candidates are to be selected by political parties. What is the basic criteria? I know the basic criteria is winnability, but how do political parties think of winnability? There are several factors, but one of the several factors is the identity question. They would prefer to give ticket to or nominate a candidate who would belong to a caste or a community which is the dominant community in a particular constituency. So from there, the question of identity comes into play in Indian elections. So you have a candidate who comes from the caste or a community which is a dominant caste community in a particular constituency. And when people vote, I have realized that large number of people also vote keeping in mind the question of identity. They would they would think, let's vote for a particular candidate, candidate A or B, and the one of the guiding principles, besides other, is the question of identity. That candidate belong to my community, the candidate belong to my caste, or candidate identity is all could also be my neighbor. So over the years, past 20 years of my research has given me enough evidence to suggest that identity is uh, a big marker in Indian politics, not only for the voters to vote, but also for political parties, also for candidates.
Yeah, thank you for that. Makes it's a very fresh perspective. So, I mean, this part of the question I think you've already answered, but if you'd like to talk more about how your research involving the concept of identity operating within the electoral processes in India, like if you'd like to, talk a little bit more about what has your research on these two themes actually revealed. What are the research findings since you've been actively engaging with these themes?
See, normally, if you speak to common people, we tend to believe that the question of identity is only pronounced among the minorities or among people, and minorities of all kinds, whether it is a religious minority or minority in terms of caste. But we have seen over the years that this question of identity is strong, whether you are educated or uneducated. We tend to believe that if you are educated, then people generally don't vote on caste lines. People don't look at the identity question. They vote more on the basis of the merits and demerits of the candidate. I think our my research has clearly indicated whether you are educated or uneducated, whether you live in an urban location or you live in villages, whether you belong to upper caste, whether you belong to a lower caste. The question of identity remains equally strong among people belonging to different levels of educational attainment, people living in different geographical locations. Over the years, at least during last 10 years, I have come to realize that this question of identity has become much stronger among the upper caste, the rich people, people living in the urban areas. Normally, we tend to believe that this question of identity uh, may be stronger among those who are uneducated, who live in the villages, or who belong to the marginalized section of the society. But as I said earlier, this is, I think, a new finding from the research that this is dominant among everyone in various shades. But over the years, last 10 years, I think this is the last one decade, is the decade when there is a role reversal. And the people who belong to the dominant communities in terms of caste, in terms of economy, in terms of geographical location, uh, they also give a lot of importance to their question of identity when it comes to casting their vote or siding with a political party. Likes and dislike of a political parties are also associated with the question of identity, because there are some political parties which are identified as close to a particular caste or close to a particular community. So this is largely what we have found from the research on how identity plays into Indian electoral politics.
Yeah, totally. I totally think this is again a very fresh perspective. Like you said, that the question of identity has solidified more for the interest of a certain group, say the dominant caste or the upper class. Do you think there is a difference between how this plays out in the state election vis-a-vis the national elections? Do you think there's a difference between these?
So absolutely. We can talk about the three levels of election. We have the national election, we have the state assembly election, and we also have elections for local body. While the question of identity is important for all three levels of election, but if we have to figure out the intensity of the question of identity, it is far more intense when we look at the local body elections, slightly less compared to the local body election when it comes to the state assembly election, and maybe slightly lesser when it comes to the national election. The reasons are very simple. While the question of who should be given ticket by political party is largely dominated by the question of identity for all the three levels of election. But the main reason is the constituencies are small, very small when it comes to the local body election. So you know the candidate, almost the candidate knows the voters by name, by everyone personally. So the question of identity becomes much stronger when it comes to the local election. When it comes to state assembly election, the question of identity weakens a little bit because constituencies become much bigger. Candidate doesn't know each and every voter of his constituency. Similarly, all the voters also don't know the candidate personally. So the question of identity becomes slightly weaker in state assembly elections. When we go to the national election, the constituencies, the Lok Sabha constituencies are very large. One Lok Sabha constituency would have roughly in the range of say 28 to 30 lakhs voters. And it is very difficult for each and every voter to know the candidate personally. The candidate to know each and every voter of his constituency. That is why the role of identity becomes further weak when we come to the higher level of election, which is the Lok Sabha election.
Yeah. Yeah, so just gathering from what you said, the social cleavages in our country, they get manifest in different ways in, say, state elections or national elections. Given that there are so many existing social cleavages in our country, be it caste, class, gender, religion, uh, how do you think these cleavages act out in India as opposed to other countries? So how is it that our country, in terms of electoral processes, in response to all these cleavages, act out as response to other countries?
See, elections are all about winnability. Nobody wants to contest election to lose election. Whether elections are being contested in USA, UK, France, Germany, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, or Nepal. Take name of any country. Whenever somebody is contesting election, whether a candidate or a political party, they want to win election. And the question of winnability uh, is the question of winnability is decided by the number of people who are going to support the candidate or the political party. The question of identity is strong, or it plays an important role in elections all over the world. But in India, since the identities are of multiple kinds, and in the Western world, if we talk about the US or UK or some other countries, in those countries also the question of identity is there, but the cleavages are small. The number of identities are far less compared to India. In US, when the elections take place, which is going to take place this year, end of this year, uh, the cleavages are so Asian American, the blacks, Africans. So the number of cleavages are very small, and that is why we don't tend to believe that, or the feeling that identities do not play a very important role in the elections in the West comes to our mind. But when it comes to India, when we look at India, caste becomes the dominant question, identity question. And we know that there are more than 3,000 castes. Now, even within a caste, there are subcastes. So if you look at the elections at the lower level, people not only look at the caste, they also look at the subcaste within the caste. We used to talk about the OBC as a vote bank in the mid 90s, but for the last 10 years, I think we have moved beyond the OBC, the other backward castes. Within the OBCs, there are a large number of castes. So we have started talking about the upper OBC, the lower OBC. Within the lower OBC, there is we have started analyzing the vote in terms of various castes within the lower OBC. So the number of cleavages are very large in India, and that is why this idea, this perception, and this image gets created that in India elections are only about social cleavages, only about identity, and these uh, identities are seen only in the name of caste. As I said, it plays an important role in most of the elections, or in all the elections which take place all over the world.
Yeah, again. Thank you for this again. This is again very insightful. In all of your responses, what I've gathered is identity in Indian politics, or say electoral processes, are very, very important. And our electoral processes are guided on the fundamental role of identities, be it any kind. What my question to you is, has this role of identity in electoral processes, have they changed over time after independence? And if they've changed, in what ways have they actually changed?
The answer could be in just one line. I could say, no, it has not changed at all. But let me try and explain this in slightly greater details for the audiences. I would say it has not changed, but the degree of the intensity of identity playing an important role in elections varies from elections to elections. And I must mention some elections when the question of identities played a lesser role compared to other elections. Look at the election of 1984. This is an election after the assassination of a popular Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Very large number of turnout in that election. 64% people turned out to vote, and this was the highest up till that election. In that election, the question of identity takes a backseat, and the question of the different other questions at the forefront. If we look at 1977 election, and this was the election when Indira Gandhi lost. This was the election which was held after a national emergency was imposed by the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which continued from 1975 till 77. So this is a question when this is an election when large number of opposition parties joined hands together and they formed a one platform called Janata Party. So they contested the election, and at least in the North India, where the question of identity is very dominant. So in the entire North India, there was an anger against Congress. People wanted to vote out Congress. So in this election, the question of identity took a backseat. So elections after election, you can see some ups and downs. There are waves, but it is very difficult to imagine that there has been any election when the identity question did not play an important role. I must also mention the last two Lok Sabha elections, the 2019 Lok Sabha election and the 2014 Lok Sabha election. We all know that 2014 Lok Sabha election is an election which Congress lost badly. BJP won by a handsome majority, and in 2019 election, BJP came with a much bigger majority. Prime Minister Narendra Modi got a much bigger mandate what he got in 2014. There is a dominant belief that this was an election when people voted on the issues of development. They voted for a very strong leader, and the question of identity took a backseat. Yes, compared to 2004 or 2009 election or 2000 or 1996 election or many other elections, the question of identity was much weaker in 2014 and 2019 elections. But I won't agree that there was no question of that people did not vote on the question of identity at all. Uh, BJP emerged as a very big party, a very large party. Look at the vote. BJP got 37% vote in 2019 election, and in 2014 election also BJP had 31% vote. This is a very sizable vote given the large number of political parties which contest elections in India. But in spite of BJP being so dominant, BJP formed alliances with very small political parties. When I say small, small in numbers, small in their presence in UP and Bihar. If you look at the profile of these political parties, you would realize that even BJP paid so much of attention for this question of identity, on the question of forming alliances with political parties which has sizable support among different castes and communities. And these were largely uh, caste marginal communities. So even when you are in a dominant position, everybody knew. Most of the opinion polls suggested that BJP would be winning the 2019 election. Still, BJP worked hard to form an alliance with smaller regional parties, which has support base among different castes and communities. So even in 2014 and 2019 elections, the question of identity was there, though it took few steps backwards. But as I said, question of identity, and that this question of identity relates to caste community. This has been a dominant theme cutting across all the Lok Sabha elections, all the 17 Lok Sabha elections held in this country up till now. If we look at the assembly election, it becomes more dominant. And if you look at the local body elections, the question of identity is far more dominant.
Yeah. Well, again, very, very insightful. On the question of identity, again, my next question is focused on that. So you wrote a paper called "Do Muslim Voters Prefer Muslim Candidates?" So one of the key highlights of the paper was how Muslims are more likely to vote for Muslim candidates if there's a realistic chances of them winning the elections. Now my question is, again, this is related to what your earlier response was. How is this different from Hindus choosing to vote for Hindus, given that Hindu itself is not, we cannot categorize Hindus as a homogeneous bloc because there are other cleavages of caste, class operating within Hindus. So how is this different from that? And my second question is, again, when we talk about Muslims voting for Muslims, we often tend to overlook caste operating within Muslim community. So if you could tell us more about what is the role of caste in the Muslim electorate also.
See, there are a large number of constituencies in India where Muslims are in sizable number. Uh, the question of caste within the Muslims arises only in the constituency or mainly in those constituencies where Muslims are in sizable number. When I say sizable number, I could put a number which is maybe roughly about 30% or so. So what happens in the constituencies where Muslims are in very large numbers, more than one political party would give ticket to a Muslim candidate. So if there are more than one candidate who belong to their particular community, which is the Muslims, it is in this situation, in this particular situation, that caste within the Muslims comes into play when Muslims decide whom to vote for. So if there is a constituency where there are 40-45% of Muslim voters, there would be political parties, more than one political party, who would have given tickets to Muslim candidates. So if there is a situation when there are three Muslim candidates contesting elections on three different party tickets, and in such a situation, caste within the Muslims comes into play when Muslims go out to vote, when they decide which candidate to vote for. Now the question, so it's not that caste within the Muslim doesn't come into play. But if there is a constituency where there are very less number of Muslims, only 10%, 15% Muslims, and only one Muslim candidate is contesting an election, tickets has not been given by other political party to a Muslim candidate. such a situation, the caste within Muslim doesn't come into play. Uh, yes, this particular Muslim candidate might belong to a particular caste within the Muslims. So suppose he belonged to a lower caste within the Muslims. I don't think we have very little evidence to suggest that in such a particular situation, Muslim voters belonging to upper caste would be unwilling to vote for this candidate. They would vote for the candidate because in such a situation, their religious identity overruns or dominates over the caste identity. Uh, so that's the situation with regard to how does caste play within the Muslim community. Now, with regard to if Muslims, we tend to believe, or the research suggests that large number of Muslims vote for a Muslim candidate if there is a Muslim candidate in a constituency. What happens if they to the Hindu candidate? Hindu is not a homogeneous group. This question of identity, as I said earlier also, is much stronger among caste communities which are smaller in number. If you look at the Hindus, 83% of population in India are belong to Hindu religion. So in a constituency, if there is only one candidate who will, if hypothetically, if there is only one candidate who belongs to a Hindu community, then everybody would be, or a large number of Hindus might wish to vote for that candidate. But what happens is that in a multi-party democracy, there would be large number of candidates who would be contesting election. On an average, we see 7 or 8 candidates contesting election in one constituency. In some constituencies, the numbers are larger. In some constituencies, the numbers are smaller. But on an average, 4 or 5 candidates are serious candidates in any constituency. And these candidates, if they belong to different castes, uh, then Hindu identity doesn't become a predominant identity among the voters who are Hindus. Then within the Hindu community, caste becomes a predominant uh, factor when they decide which party to vote for or which candidate to vote for. So that is why the kind of identity, the role of identity which we see among the Muslims voting for a Muslim candidate, we don't see that kind of an intensity when Hindus decide to vote for a Hindu candidate. Within the Hindus, there are different castes, and then the question of identity is guided more towards the caste rather than on religion among the Hindus.
Thank you for that. Again, my question is now focused on how gender plays out in electoral processes. You've written a paper on how there's been active and overwhelming increase of women's participation, and they're coming out to vote in larger numbers. But even having said that, there is still a huge gap in how female voters are mobilized for issues concerning women themselves. For example, like we talked about how, because identity has played an important factor, there's been considerable effort to mobilize people on the basis of caste, class, religion, so on and so forth in India. But we've seen very little effort or concerted effort toward gender as a whole. So what I would like to know from you is, what do you think are the factors contributing towards this gap, that there are more voters coming up, that there are more female voters coming out to vote, but then there are no efforts to mobilize the female voters? And what do you think can be done to address female representation in India? Because I think it's absolutely the need of the hour that we talk about this.
Well, let me begin by the last question. I think one simple yes, going by all the numbers, whether it is representation of women in the Lok Sabha or representation of women in various state assemblies. If you look at the numbers are very disturbing. Roughly about, on an average, 8 to 10% women are represented in various state assemblies. When I say average, this is in some state assemblies there would be slightly higher representation. In some state assemblies, it's a lower representation. 2019 Lok Sabha election is an election when largest number of women got elected to the Lok Sabha. But if you look at the numbers are not, promising. I think one simple way could be to make some amendment in the election rule and make it mandatory for political parties to give tickets to at least 1/3, whatever may be the number. My suggestion would be, say, about 1/3 of the seats party decides to contest should be given the ticket should be given to the women candidate. So if parties had decided to field 100 candidates to contest election, at least 33 seats should be given to the women candidates. There are lots of ifs and buts about then party would be giving tickets to the women in weaker constituencies, but at least there would be a beginning. At the moment, if you look at the number of candidates who are given tickets, the women candidates who are given tickets by political parties, this is very small, very tiny. In 2019 election, only two political parties took a initiative in this regard. Naveen Patnaik in Odisha gave tickets to large number of women candidates, and then it was followed by Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal. And if you look at the representation from West Bengal and Odisha, it did make a difference. So if we keep appealing to political parties, I'm sure this is not going to work with political parties. So I think there is a need to make changes in the rules, make it mandatory for all political parties to give X number of tickets to women candidates if they decide to field X number of candidates. And that X number, my own suggestion is at least 33%. No harm if you decide to make it to 50% because women are roughly 50% of India's population. But if 50% seems to be too high, then at least make it 33% or even 25%, but at least some beginning, making it mandatory for political parties to give tickets to women candidates. If that is done, I think there would be some increase in women representation in state assembly as well as Lok Sabha. It may not be to the desired level. We will not achieve 50% representation of women in state assemblies and Lok Sabha, but at least it would be far better compared to the numbers which we see at the moment. Uh, Now the question of, if we look at the women turnout, yes, that's an amazing thing which has happened in Indian elections. And I keep saying that's the biggest revolution in Indian elections. If you look at the turnout figures of the Lok Sabha elections held in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, if we look at 1957 election or 62 election or 52 elections, this was the time when the gender gap in turnout between men and women used to be 16%, 17%, 15%. And over a period of time, for the last, like for about 2 decades or 3 decades, it stabilized at 10%, which is to say 10% less women turned out to vote compared to men. But things started changing since 2009 Lok Sabha election. In 2009 Lok Sabha election, the gap between men and women turnout declined to just 4.5%. In 2014 Lok Sabha election, it further declined to 1.6%. And if you look at 2019 Lok Sabha election, it is almost at par. Still, there is a very small gap, 0.6% gap between men and women turnout. If we look at various state assembly elections, in various states, actually women have outnumbered men if it comes to the turnout. So there is a big change. How did it happen? There was no legislation required. Nothing has changed over last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But women have turned out to vote in much bigger numbers because they mobilized themselves. This is now being noticed by political parties, and they have started devising strategies to mobilize women as women voters. And when I say they have started mobilizing, it's not during the campaign. They are not going out to make appeal to women voters to vote for a particular candidate or particular party. But if you look at the various programs and policies of different state governments in different states over last 1 decade, you would get a sense that large number of programs and policies of the government are aimed at only catering to women needs of the women. That's the strategy to mobilize women voters towards their side. It began in Bihar. You would recollect that Nitish Kumar, the Chief Minister of Bihar, decided to give cycle to all the girls who would pass class 10. So there was a beginning in Bihar, and I must mention Bihar is the state which has witnessed highest gender gap between men and women turnout, and this gender gap is favorable in favor of women. 7% more women voted compared to men. If we look at the last Lok Sabha election and assembly election, so the beginning took place in Bihar. If you look at various schemes of the central government, the Ujjwala scheme and various such schemes, these are aimed. What is Ujjwala scheme? Ujjwala scheme is aimed at giving gas connection to women living in villages. this is also a strategy to mobilize women in favor of the ruling party. If we keep looking at schemes of various state government, whether it is UP, Telangana, and we can keep taking names of different state government, and you look at the various programs and policies aimed at, you know, catering to the needs of the women, you would get a sense that political parties, when they are in government, they have started devising a clever way of mobilizing or at least making an appeal to the women voters. And I think we have started witnessing the change. Women have started voting in favor of the parties which have come up with various schemes for the women. So this is a clever strategy to mobilize women. A beginning has taken place, and I think we would see more states uh, going in the direction uh, which was started by the Bihar Chief Minister Nitish Kumar way back in 2005.
Yes. Thank you. That was a very solution-oriented response. I would just like to ask a question. Again, I mean, this question should have asked earlier, but as a response to what you just answered, that there should be a mandated, like there should be some amount of reservation for political parties to have female candidates, right? And you
Yes.
also said that there should also be, so female voters have been mobilizing themselves to come out to vote in large numbers. And also, given that the women reservation bill has been pending in the parliament since quite some time, what do you think is the main reason behind political parties being hesitant to have female candidates? And second, the reason why they think they're not making enough efforts to mobilize female voters, because the situation has come out as such that female voters are mobilizing themselves. But my question is, why aren't the political parties doing enough to do so? Yeah.
See, there is a misconception. The misconception is that winnability is not very high among the women candidates. So political parties believe that if you give tickets to women candidates, they would lose election. The chances of their losing election is higher compared to chances of losing election of a male candidate. But I think this is a very simple data. If they look at the numbers, they would realize that the winnability is much higher among the women candidates. So the only misconception among political parties that the winnability is low among women. They hesitate to give tickets to women candidates. As I said, if you look at the numbers, the winnability is much higher among women candidates compared to men. But there is a catch. What is the catch? The catch is the women candidates who have been nominated in the past by political parties are not an average candidate. They are not the normal women candidates. When I say they are not the normal candidates, no, you would see that most of these women candidates are either wife or daughter-in-law of someone who has been in politics from that area for a very long time. So they actually belong to a political family. They belong to they have a political background. So women who come from a political background, they have a greater winnability. They have a chances of bigger winnability. But overall, if you look at the number of women who have contested election and the proportionality in which they get elected, it is much higher compared to men. So this party needs to realize, and party also needs to, come out of this mold that if you give tickets only to women who come from a political party, they would be seen as winnable. They should try and give they should try and give tickets to more women candidates. As I said, that's the hesitation among political parties for giving tickets to women candidates. The question of mobilization, as I said, parties are not appealing when they campaign. They don't appeal to the women that, yes, come out and vote for me. Only when the party has nominated a women candidate, you would find women candidates when they go out to campaign. They make appeal in the name of gender. They would make appeal in the name of women's safety and several related issues. But political parties have devised a clever policy, and clever policies that come up with schemes and policies and programs which caters the needs of the women, and they think that that may be an indirect way of mobilizing the women in favor of a political party.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That was a very important myth that will get busted through this interview today. So we'll now move on to some more general questions. In one of your interviews, when you were heading the Center for Development Societies as a director, I read this interview where we were talking about how important was India's research engagements with its neighboring countries in South Asia to develop a more coherent and a wide study on democracy in South Asia. Given that we as Research Collective, we also try to partner with a lot of research scholars and researchers across the world. We would like to know more about your stand on this and what exactly, if you would like to talk a little bit more about this.
See, I have already traveled for 25 years in my research journey, and my entire research journey has been very, very collective. When we do large scale surveys across the country, this is a collective effort. I don't do all the research myself. Yes, I take lead in most of the research, but these research are collective. You did mention about our South Asia study. We have done 3 rounds of a study called State of Democracy in South Asia. This is a 5 country study: India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And these studies are survey-based studies. So if you want to do survey-based studies, you need to have a strong foot in the locale where you want to do the study. So we needed to develop collaboration in these 5 countries. I think developing collaboration is very important if you want to do research. If you want to do, and the research which needs field-based research. If you want to do a field work, it is important to do the data analysis. Yes, data analysis, sitting on the computer, looking at the data, looking at the findings, doing various kinds of analysis is one aspect of research. But it is important, and it gives the researcher a valuable input if you get inputs from the field. How do you get inputs from the field if you don't go to the field? And how do you go to the field if you don't know your field? So if I need to go to Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or whichever country I want to do a research. So when we wanted to do the research on state of democracy in South Asia, we developed this network across South Asia. We went to the field. I'm not saying that I went to each and every place, but at least I went to most of these countries. We went there, we developed network, we trained the people, we went to the field, we looked at the local situation. And when we are back in our country, working on the data, looking at the data, doing the analysis, the inputs which we get from the field, which is a very rich input, uh, that's very helpful. As I said, uh, you have the data gives you the structure, but that structure gets flesh and blood, flesh and blood from the local inputs. That's very important. I think personally, I would say we have been very fortunate to have developed such a good network across South Asian countries. We have also developed network across some of the countries in the Europe where we wanted to do some research. So the collective research is very important, and it is very important, very useful to develop such uh, networks to do collective research. I think there is no escape from that.
Yeah. Um, just as a follow-up question, yes, we do have a proper research network to study democracies now in South Asia. But do you think we have and what do you think about the quality and extent of the research network that exists in India specifically to study discrimination within electoral processes? Do you think there is enough collaboration taking place? Do you think there is value to aspiring for such collaborations?
So there is a lot of aspiration for developing such collaboration, but sadly, I have not come across large number of networks either to do study on the question of identity, question of politics, or marginality, or any other question. It's a sad part of, I think, Indian academia that we don't find large number of networks. There have been networks in the past, but not even if you develop a network, we tend to see that networks don't last for long. We have been fortunate that our network, the Lokniti network, has been in place for the last 25 years. I think the big advantage of having this network surviving for 25 years is that most of the people are based across the country. They don't see themselves as competitor, but they all see them as complementing each other. So for any network to survive for long, it is important to see your collaborators not as your competitors but as collaborators. But as I said earlier, I have not come across large number of networks in India which have been engaged in various kinds of research work. But I think there is a great need for a country like India, a vast country like India, to have network if you want to do like field-based research. If I don't have the network, how do I do the fieldwork in Mizoram, Meghalaya, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Sri Lanka, in Jammu and Kashmir? So uh, I don't think that it is humanly possible for 1% or 2% sitting in Delhi or sitting in one city to do a field-based research across the country. So such collaboration are essential. It is important. I think that's the basic of doing a field-based research if you want to cover a very large area.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I mean, in terms of collaboration, that this is what exactly we're trying to do at Research Collective. So it's definitely very encouraging. One of my last questions would be, given that you've studied on identities and electoral processes so extensively, I would like to know if you have come across certain questions, especially related to identity-linked decision making and biases within the electoral processes that haven't received enough attention, that people are not talking about it. And if you'd like to tell us if there is anything else that you found out and that there is more to research on.
See, most of our research looks at things from a macro perspective, and that has been one of the criticism of some of the criticism of our research. When we talk about, say, the question of identity, we would talk about the question of identity at the national level, at the state level. We would talk about how Dalits vote, how youths vote, how Muslims vote. We would keep talking about various caste communities. We would also talk about, how women are started taking independent decisions of vote. But as soon as we give big narratives of the national narrative or the state-wise narrative, there would be counter question. People would say, but this is not happening in my village. This is not happening in my locality. So I think there is a need to do more localized research. Uh, I know that one research tool or one research cannot answer all the questions. So I think our mega research needs to be supplemented by some micro research at constituency level, micro research at a block level, at very localized level to understand politics from below. We have also tried to understand politics from below. When we do our studies on politics, on elections, we don't normally try and go and interview the politicians. We actually try and interview the people because we think uh, it is the people of this country, the voter of this country, who decide how the politics will take place. So I think there is a need to supplement the macro level studies with micro level studies, which could be about candidates, which could be about political parties. There is a need to do a systematic study about political parties. How does these political parties operate? Mostly, especially when there are no elections. What do political parties do when there are no elections? How do they survive? What is the structure of political parties? So this is one field which needs to be explored in the field of election research. One question which we have tried to understand by doing some research, which is about why do we see women turning out to vote in such a large number? What has happened suddenly in India during last 10 years? We saw women turning out to vote in such a large number. We did a project, we did a research. The report was released, I think, 4 or 5 months ago. But I think we have not been able to fully understand this or response, fully give a response to this question of why do we see women turning out to vote in such a big number. That's another area to unfold the story of women vote in India, women voters in India, women candidates in India. Uh, so these are some of the areas which needs more attention, which needs more research to be done. There could be other which I am unable to think at the moment, but I think these two, understanding political parties, how do political parties survive when there are no funding within political parties? There is a demand for transparency about funding of political parties. So a lot of research on political parties needs to be done. A lot of research on campaign needs to be done. How does campaigning to take place? And in the present day of lockdown, there is also a talk about how will this lockdown and going to affect the nature of campaign. Will we see? Do we see some change in the nature of campaign in coming days, coming months, in coming elections? So Also some studies on election campaign, election finances. And as I said, I'm repeating again, women voters. Why do we see women turning out? What has excited women all of a sudden during last 10 years when they are turning out to vote in such a large number?
Indeed, yes, that'll be very interesting to look at. I think my last question is again a very general one, because you've been engaged with this field for like engaging with this field since last 20 years, and you've come up with a lot of books and co-authored with a lot of books. I personally would want to know if if you have suggestions for researchers and certain books that we should definitely read to understand identity linked discrimination / identities within electoral processes in India.
Very difficult at the moment to figure out the name of the book, but I think there are books by some of the books from our network. After every Lok Sabha elections, we have published book on the Lok Sabha elections. The 2019 book is yet to come out. So the researchers could look for books on the 2014 Lok Sabha elections, 2009 Lok Sabha elections, maybe by books by Professor Sudha Pai, who used to teach in JNU. There could be other books, but I think I may not be able to name the books or name the authors at the moment. But there could be lots of books on question of identity and electoral politics in India.
Of course, thank you. Neeraj, do you have any other questions? Because I think I'm done from my end.
No, I think that was great, Professor. I just have one follow-up. What are the research projects you are embarking on in the next 1 year? Can you just share a little bit about that?
You would notice that whenever we do research, we look at 3 platforms for dissemination. One is the media. So whenever we do research, the preliminary findings would be released through the popular media, whether it is television or newspaper. I keep writing regularly for newspaper, and as a collective, our group, Lokniti group, also keep writing for various newspapers. So that's our first dissemination method. And when we write for newspaper, when we disseminate our findings through the media, this reaches out to the largest number of audience possibly we could reach. The second stage is the research journal. So after every election, we try and contribute articles, research articles to research journals. We would definitely target Economic and Political Weekly, which is very widely read in India. So we would, the second stage of analysis or a higher stage of analysis or dissemination among slightly more nuanced reader is through the academic articles. And then the third level is the book. So whenever we do research, whether it is on youth, women, electoral politics, identity politics, these are the 3 levels of dissemination: media, academic articles in research journals, and the book. So when we come out with books take time. It takes about 2-3 years after the research is completed. So it has a larger shelf value, but it reaches out to not such a large audience as we could reach through newspaper articles. So these are the 3 levels of dissemination.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, my question was about what are the new research projects you are initiating in the next 1 year?
So I thought, what are the new areas of dissemination? A new research project. During last 2 years, we did research on the policing in India. I don't know whether you have noticed that report or not. In year 1, we actually interviewed 20,000 people across the country in 22 states to figure out what do they think about policing in India, if they have ever come across, meeting the police. So what is their opinion, attitude towards police? The second year we did the research, we interviewed the policemen across 22 states about their service condition, about their anxieties, work pressure. So at the moment, we are in the process of doing a research on what is the difficulty of doing, or what are the challenges of doing policing in the troubled regions. When I say troubled regions, these are the the Naxal affected regions, the regions which are affected by the Maoist problem. So this is a project which we are doing at the moment. If the lockdown has not started, at the moment we would have been doing the fieldwork about that study. also this is a year we are repeating our youth study. When I say we are repeating, see, in a survey based, if you do a database survey based research, uh, it is important to keep tracking opinions, attitudes over a period of time. You would have realized that during last 12 years, we have done 3 rounds of youth study. So this year is also our year to repeat the youth study. So this would be the 4th youth study in a row. And when I say we are repeating that study, we ask some questions again and again. And in every survey, we add new questions. So that's another research which we are trying to do in this year. We were also waiting for Bihar elections, and next year we also have elections for 4 other states. So election is a routine research which we keep tracking. We don't miss out any election. But besides election, these are the 2 big projects which we are doing at the moment. Besides that, I'm also engaged with writing my own book on looking at elections in India. I think the tentative title of the book is Elections in India, Past, Present, and Future. And why I have tentatively put the title Past, Present, and Future, because I'm looking at how elections have taken place during past 70 years. What do we see the trend at the moment, and what do we visualize in the next decade or so? So these are some of the work which I am doing in my personal capacity, and also as a team leader leading the 2 projects which I mentioned.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Well, I think we are done from our end. This was really, really great. Thank you for taking our time to do this, even after we had to reschedule it a few times. And yeah, so we will send the record to you to see if you're okay with that, and we'll upload it on our social media page if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you for taking our time today. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. This is great.
Thank you, Professor. Bye for now.